Good evening. Welcome to the Pulitzer Center. Can I just see a show of hands? Is this anyone's first time visiting us? Yes, welcome, welcome. And thank you for those of you who are returning as well. The Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit based here in DC, where you are right now. And we are an organization that believes in increasing engagement with underreported, pressing global issues, and we do that in two ways. The first is by supporting journalism, and we are fortunate to have one of our grantees here tonight, Melissa Noel. And Melissa is one of hundreds of journalists we've worked with over the past 12 years. In our first year, we supported 9 projects. We now support almost 100, or is it over 150 projects a year. Many of those journalists publishing several stories, so doing the math, that's a lot of incredible journalism. And all it has in common is these are underreported global issues. So if you enjoy the story today, you want to meet more of our journalists and see more of their work, you might have seen it before, because the work is published in hundreds of outlets, over 100 outlets. But you can also find those stories on our website, pulitzercenter.org. You could follow us on Twitter. Anyone in the room use Instagram? Instagram users, yes. If you follow our Instagram, we actually hand the account over to a different grantee every week, so you could meet them directly that way. But again, supporting grants is one part of how we try to keep these stories alive. Another thing that we do is we have an education and outreach program that works to extend the life of these stories. This is an example of some of our outreach programming. Melissa has also been with us the past 2 days, and she'll have one more day here meeting directly with students in elementary, middle, and high schools here in DC. We work all across the US, bringing journalists into classrooms in person, and all over the world bringing journalists into classrooms over Skype. We also have curriculum on our website. We're even running an exciting contest for students. So if you're interested, your old teachers, you have young kids who might be interested in connecting to more global news and to journalists, you can talk to me afterward. I work in the education department, but also you can check us out on pulitzercenter.org/education. So thank you for coming. Please help spread the word about the work that we do, and also please help spread the word about this incredible underreported story that you're going to learn about tonight from Melissa. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn the floor over to her to tell us a little bit more about her story, and then we'll have plenty of time for you all to ask questions. And I think she was saying she really wants to have a conversation, so we'll be able to do that. Can we welcome Melissa with a big round of applause, please? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fareed. I first just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I really appreciate your presence. And I'd like to say a special thank you to the Pulitzer Center for this just awesome experience. For myself as a freelance journalist, it's often been very difficult for me to get the kind of funding I need to do stories like this. A lot of times Caribbean stories do go underreported because most times in mainstream media, mainstream American news, you hear about the Caribbean region when it's a natural disaster, when it's crime, that kind of thing, but you don't get to hear about it as often when there are other issues of social issues or other kinds of stories. So it was really important for me to be able to get the opportunity to tell more of these stories. And I have a really great support system at the places that I do freelance for, including NBCBLK.com, which is where this series ran. But I just wanted to just reiterate how important it is for journalists like myself to have this support. It is imperative for me, because this series, Love in a Barrel, it's something that I came across over 2 years ago. In 2016, I went to a film screening in Brooklyn, New York. That's where I do a lot of my reporting. And Brooklyn is home to the largest Caribbean population in the United States. So I always would get really great stories there. And I went to a film screening, and there was a fictional film that was done by Lisa Harewood, a Barbadian filmmaker, who actually highlighted this issue, this problem, but in a fictional story. And I was so moved by it, and I wanted to know a little bit more. And I happened to meet a young woman whose name happens to be Melissa also after that film screening. And she let me know that although, what we saw was fictional, it represented a lot of the very real things that she went through when she was separated from her mother, who left Trinidad and Tobago, and she didn't rejoin her mother until she was about 15 or 16 years old. So afterwards, speaking with Lisa Harewood, speaking with Melissa, meeting with a few other people, I knew that there was a bigger story there, but how was I going to tell this story? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew that I could do something about this, because what I found was that people like Melissa and so many others that I met in Brooklyn from different Caribbean islands had a lot of, they suffered a lot of trauma because of the separations that they have from their parents for sometimes 10, 15, 20. I met people who never rejoined, never saw their parents again. And for me, I said, wow, you know, as a Caribbean American myself, my family's from Guyana, I said, well, why didn't I ever think about this? Why wasn't this something on my radar? And I think it's because migration is always looked at as something that's really positive, and that is in terms of the economic, you know, you're able to improve your economic status for your family, you're able to provide that kind of thing. So I always would think about it in the positive way, but I never really stopped to think about, well, you're able to send things back home, money or barrels, hence the terminology that you're going to hear about in a minute. But what about the children who are left behind, or other family members that are left behind? What happens to them? How do they cope? What is the relationship like? Or do they even have one? And that's what I wanted to investigate. So I started in Brooklyn, and then in order for me to take it to the Caribbean, I knew I was going to need help. So that's where that's where the funding from Pulitzer came in and allowed me to spend a considerable amount of time in Jamaica so that I could report that part of the story. So what I think I'd like to do now is just let you into a little bit more about this issue, so you can kind of just see for yourself, hear from some of the people, and then we'll get back into it. So this story ended up being a two-part series for NBCBLK.com. So it ran on NBCnews.com, and I would just like to take a moment and acknowledge my editor, Shondelise Duster, who is here from NBC News, that came to support me tonight. I think I just want her to know how much I appreciated the time and effort that she spent to make this series really what it is, listening to my concerns or the things that I really wanted to get out of it, especially when we went through a lot of changes. You know, I had my editor, Amber Payne, at that time, who actually left NBC, left that role, and Shondelise came in, and she really, really helped me to create the vision that I really wanted for this. So I really appreciate that. And so what I'd like to share, just to give you an idea of this story, of its impact, is the video component that ran with the first part of the series on NBCBLK. And I think it'll give, whether you have an idea of what this really is or not, it'll give you a sense of how people are really impacted by this absence. So I'm gonna play that really quickly.
My dad migrated, and only way I can contact him or see him or anything is over phone.
Growing up, I was the only one out of my friends who didn't really have their parents around.
My mom has been living abroad from I was like 3 years old.
These are some of Jamaica's barrel children, those left behind when a parent migrates for economic opportunities.
Barrel children are children who are waiting to rejoin their parents in the metropole. They receive material goods in the form of shoes, clothing, food, but they lack the emotional nurturance that they need.
The name comes from the shipping containers used to send those goods back home. For decades, sending barrels have been a way to sustain families still living in the Caribbean. They're also an attempt to maintain an emotional connection. But Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, a clinical social worker who coined the term in the early 1990s, says it's not enough.
You have emotional reactions, you have behavioral reactions, you have deep psychological reactions. and they revolve around feelings of worthlessness, sadness, and sometimes that pain can last for a lifetime.
She wants her research and advocacy to help the children of Jamaica, and also to bring attention to the emotional impact of migration throughout the Caribbean. 15-year-old Lejean Reed was 8 years old when his father moved to Canada.
Although I have my mother, my stepdad, and my two brothers, I feel lonely because he don't call and those things. If I don't call, he don't call.
Dr. Brown mentors kids like Reed using play and art therapy, and she's launched similar programs at schools across Jamaica. She stresses the importance of communication.
They have to prepare the child beforehand, and the notion of letting the child know exactly what is happening and when it is going to happen is not something that is left up to chance, but the child has to be involved in the process. There have to be family meetings.
26-year-old Nacia Houghton's mom left 2 decades ago to work as a nurse in Canada.
From as long as I can remember, no one in my household has ever worked in Jamaica. The entire household is supported from people living abroad.
The salary her mom earns is now putting her through school and supporting her grandparents.
We spoke to each other like every single day. We know what each other is doing. We know everything about each other because we keep in contact. She's just one video call away, I'm just one call away, and we just call, talk every day.
For others, regular communication is not enough to fill the void. Artist Kellyanne Lindell's parents left Jamaica for the U.S. when she was only 8 years old. She now creates work inspired by her experience as a barrel child.
The bond that my mother would hope that we have, we don't necessarily have. And I think that had to do with the fact that I had to sort of separate myself to kind of keep myself from hurting. So now it's almost like she would say that I don't care or like I'm really cold towards her, but that's not the case. It's just our relationship is just, you know, I do love you, I do care about you, but that closeness that she would want is just not there.
Linda wants her artwork to spark more conversation about how parental absence can impact people throughout their lives, not just during childhood. With migration being a path out of economic hardship for many people in the Caribbean, it's unlikely to end anytime soon.
Find a way to contact your child. There's so much method of communication. Speak to them as often as possible. Get involved in their life. Know their decision. Know when they're sad. Know when they're unhappy. Find the time to communicate with your child or your loved ones or family.
Okay, so I just wanted to play that because I feel like it gives a lot of great context to what this issue is, what the impact is for several people. So this series took me pretty much all over the island of Jamaica. We interviewed over 30 people in the span of about 6 months. I was able to work with the video team at NBC News as well as my editors for the print portion of it. And in the field itself, it was difficult at times to get people to open up about, something as so personal and so traumatic. But being able to work through people like Dr. Claudette Brown, who is the Jamaican sociologist that coined that terminology more than 20 years ago. So it's not that I found something, it's not that this story is new, it's that there hadn't really been a comprehensive look at, hey, what is the issue here? What's being done about it? And then also the second part of it, what happens when the families actually do reunite? What are the issues that you face then? So I wanted the series to actually look at both sides. And I was lucky enough to have the support through Pulitzer and through NBCnews.com to do both, to show you that part in Jamaica. With people like Kellyanne, she's an artist. And as painful as her experience has been for her, Kellyanne now uses that story to not only to show people how this impacts, but get people to have a conversation about it using her art. And she's opening up about the fact that, hey, one of the things that we're missing in this community, the Caribbean community in particular, is taking the opportunity to go to counseling. That's something that's very taboo in this community, going to counseling, seeking counseling for these kinds of issues. So the resources aren't as available. So you have people like Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown at the University of the West Indies, who's using art therapy to help these children. You have social workers here in the US that are also working to help these children. But then the other thing that I found in my reporting is that what there is not a lot of is the comprehensive kind of programs for these families, because what happens is there's a breakdown in the bond. There's a breakdown in the communication. So for Kellyanne, she knows her mom is her mom, but for her affinity, her affection is to her grandparents, because those are the people that raised her. And what she told me so many times is that what she wished that she had was some counseling. What she wished that she had was the opportunity to have a conversation with her mom and her dad before they left Jamaica to figure out, well, how can we make this work for the both of us? And what I found was that was missing for a lot of people. There's a young woman that's included in the second part of the series. Her name is Monique Campbell, and she came to the U.S. As a teenager. She's now 27 years old, and in almost 12 years, she still doesn't feel comfortable enough to talk to her mom about how difficult it was to have all those years away from her. And she tells me that she still is trying to figure out how she's going to approach that conversation. So it's a kind of thing where this is an immigration story, but this is an economic story. This is a mental health story. These were all these things in one. And I thought that it was so important to bring this all together and tie it all together in this kind of story so that people could really understand the layers. And also because oftentimes when we think about the immigration discussions that we have in the news in this country, a lot of times we don't see stories about Black immigrants. We don't see stories about immigration that affect, how is it affecting and impacting mental health? And then also, what are some solutions? That was one of the things that I thought was really important to look at. How are people helping these families? We found in the reporting through NBCnews.com that there is really no comprehensive programming to support counseling for these families. We didn't find any federal programming. What we did find were like Caribbean churches in New York, in Miami, that will facilitate providing counseling services, or maybe a pastor is a certified counselor, and they will do that. And I'm going to use one more example to show you guys this family in particular. Errol Ray Sr. and Errol Ray Jr., this father and son. Errol Ray Sr. left his son in Jamaica when he was 2 days old. And he made that sacrifice to leave his son so young because that's when he actually was able to get a visa to come to the United States, do that visa lottery. So he didn't want to take the chance and not be able, and not know when he would be able to have that opportunity again. So he came to the US to work as a mason and a plumber. He left his son behind. And when I spoke to him, he told me while he would do it all over again, because he's able to provide, he was able to send Errol to college to make sure he has a good roof over his head and do a lot of the things that he wasn't able to do in Jamaica. What he regrets is missing that father-son time, not being there when he had a bad day at school, missing some of those father-son moments. And then when Errol Ray Jr. actually moved here at the age of 16, that conflict that they were strangers. They had to literally relearn each other, get to know each other, go to counseling. And they were one of the families that got counseling through their church in the Bronx, New York, through a pastor to help them learn how to bond as father and son. Those are the kinds of things that really touched me and kind of pulled at me a lot, to know that you make such a sacrifice for your children, and you're doing it with every good intent, and you want people to know that you're doing this with your children in mind, but oftentimes, people do see you as a bad parent, one, which you're not, because you're doing this with your family in mind, but then also dealing with the fact that sometimes your children do resent you, or you want to discipline them, but they're saying to you that you're a stranger. So sitting with and interviewing, talking to people like the Rays, it really opened my eyes to just how much migration really does impact the bond. And then on top of that, what makes that even more difficult is then how the immigration system keeps them apart for such a long time, because that process, he first applied for Errol Ray Jr. When he was 3 years old, but his paperwork had some errors in it, so that application was denied. And he spent, a couple $1,000s on that kind of paperwork, and he didn't have additional money to do it again. So he decided that he would wait until his son was 13 years old to try again. And when he did try again, when Errol Ray Jr. was 13 years old, it took 5 years before his son's paperwork and everything came through for him to get the visa so that he could come to the United States and live permanently. And what I thought was really important, and what we saw in a lot of the comments that came from this story once it published, was that people did not know that process took so long. People were not aware that it would take that amount of time for him to rejoin his parent. And I thought that was an important point to make, so people understand that when we talk about immigration, and sometimes you hear, hey, just get in line like everyone else, do that kind of thing. Yes, you should make sure you're doing things the right way, but these are people who are coming here legally, and they are doing what they are trying their best to provide for their families, and they're still facing real long-term hardship, both financially and emotionally, due to a lot of the systems that are in place. So I think that a lot of people's eyes were open to some of the real harsh realities of the immigration process, as well as sometimes you don't think about that emotional part of it. I know I didn't think about it. Every time I would think about barrels, I always thought about good things, because anytime I would pack a barrel to send to Guyana, or anytime a barrel was going out, I always thought about good things, because you're packing it with clothes, you're packing it with food, toiletries, household items, all the things that you would want to send for somebody that you love. So I'm thinking all great things. This showed me a really another side of it. Like Kellyanne said, love in a barrel is the things you want to send to show somebody that you love them. But then it's also a reminder that while you have the things, the parent is not there. For Lejean Reed, he's 15 years old. He's a soccer star. And he told me so many times, one of the biggest things that gets to him is that when he has a game, all the other kids, their parents are there. He has his mom, he has his brothers, but he really wants his dad. And one thing I can never get out of my head is when he would mention, if I don't call him, he won't call me. And so I think for the parents too, one thing that really stuck out is that in them trying to do this for their children and being here working and being so busy, sometimes not realizing that, yes, you're sending things, but your child really wants your time. So working with people like Dr. Brown, or social workers in New York City and in DC, where you have large Caribbean populations, they are working with parents to help them understand that, hey, yes, you're making this decision for your child, but include your child in this decision. Make sure that the caretakers who are going to be, caring for them have an idea of your parenting style. Make sure you keep in contact. So for Nacia, her and her mom has not lived in Jamaica for 22 years, but her and her mom are best friends, as she says, and that's because of their communication. They talk every single day, they video chat every day, and for Nacia, this past May was the first time she has ever spent Mother's Day with her mom. And that was such a huge thing. I said, wait, you've never spent a Mother's Day with your mom in your whole life, and she's 26 years old. She hadn't. This was the first, this past Mother's Day was the first time. But for her, that communication is why they're so close. And so that's what a lot of the counselors and a lot of the art therapy and the things that are being done suggest that communication is paramount, especially in the age of technology now. So for me, this story was not only, or this series was not only something that I came across. For me, I felt like I had a responsibility to tell this story, to make sure that people knew that there's a whole group of people who are going through this, and not just this group of people, people who migrate from anywhere. For the Caribbean, it's barrels. For another part of the world, it could be boxes, it could be something else. But this is having an impact on the mental health of a lot of people who not only are in those countries, but come here and are your neighbors, your classmates, the people, your coworkers. And sometimes you really don't know what they're struggling with. But this really opened my eyes to a lot, and I hope that it gave you some sense of how difficult this process can be for so many people.
And we have plenty of time for questions. Oh my gosh, hello. Yes?
Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
As I told you, this resonates with me because I was a barrel child too. My father was in London, and we were in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't live with him for 17 years.
Wow,
And when we got to Miami, he came in, and it was like, okay, this is the way we're going to do things. And it was crazy. It was just a lot of conflict, a lot of anger. And it was my mom, my twin brother, and sisters
Mm-hmm.
against him. He ended up going to the hospital because he had an enlarged heart because there was so much conflict, and he was just refusing to just kind of ease into a new situation. One of the things I wanted to say, though, is that in my experiences, most parents in Jamaica, it might have changed now, they don't talk to their children about these things because they talk about their adult things and their children's things. And children, they don't believe that a child should be a part of a grown-up's conversation. So I'm hoping that's changed, and but there are a lot of issues that I'm glad you did this because it is an issue that people need to know more about. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was one of the things that I found a lot of, and a lot of the interviews I did with some of people who are now in their 20s. They said, my mom never talked to me about this. It was just, hey, I'm going away, I'll be back, and that was it. Or this is grown folks conversation. And one of the things I heard over and over was, I wish my mom or dad would have sat me down and had a conversation with me about this because it's something that was going to directly affect me. So that is still an issue, and that's one of the things that so many of the counselors and teachers that I interviewed for this series talked a lot about, is getting the parents to understand that this is not a adult conversation, child conversation, or as they would say, big people conversation. This is a conversation that has to happen as a family. This is something that's going to affect the entire family. But changing that mindset hasn't been the easiest, but there is change that is occurring. But that was one thing that I did hear a lot from people. I wish my parents would have included me in the conversation because this is going to directly affect me. And that was not something, sitting down talking about, well, who might be the best caretaker, to take care of you? Is it, auntie such and such, or do you need to go to your grandmother instead? What kind of schedule should we have? How do we keep you, going steady? So definitely, and thank you for that comment.
We were fortunate because my mother told us what the deal was. She's like, economically, not much is going on in Jamaica, and we came from London in 1966, and by 1969 she was in the U.S. because as soon as she landed, she was like, well, this isn't working, and I need to find another way. And in those days, she walked off the street into the U.S. Embassy. Now it's a 10-year wait. So it's a whole different ballgame now. Thanks.
You said now it's a 10-year wait?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you? Yeah. I'm so glad that this came up on my Facebook page. This is really interesting. I'm married to a Jamaican, and one of the things that you brought up was about they don't talk about things, you know, a big people conversation, not, you know. So if I think a couple of things. There's not a lot known about the culture, you know. I think when people go see sunny Jamaica, they just think it's paradise, you know. People, you know, this is great. They see the people who are, you know, there serving them in all-inclusives, and they kind of, you know, have this one, you know, one unidimensional, I guess you can say, idea of what Jamaica is like and the people, and they say, oh, the people are so nice and they're so friendly and hospitable, etc. But there's a whole nother side to it, you know. And I think because the culture is so insular, like they don't, you know, talk about a lot of their problems, you know. So they won't tell you a lot about their. I'm surprised they even talk to you on camera, you know, about their situations. I'm sure. And you know, what I guess what I'm trying to say is that the culture being so insular and people not knowing what the barriers are to immigration here, and the whole idea of you bringing up that the black immigration issue, and particularly from the Caribbean, because I think some people assume that it's easy to get here from Jamaica or Caribbean islands. For some reason, I'm not quite sure why they think that. But that's been my experience in talking to people, and they don't really know like what the barriers are. Like, why would they want to leave sunny paradise to come to America? And so they assume, you know, oh, this is a bad parent, you know, and they're just going to send a barrel or not, because they may get here and not really have the job and money enough to send a barrel. And I'm glad you're even bringing up this conversation, because it brings up those issues that people really need to talk about and recognize. And one is the black immigration situation, particularly from the Caribbean. And the other is to at least dig into the culture of the varying Caribbean islands and realize that this is not, you know, they're not, they are a different group of people, just like Jamaica's different from Cuba, et cetera, you know. So, just the discussion, I think, about the barriers to immigration, as well as what people there have to deal with on a daily basis. You may not know that the people who serve you in the restaurant, in the all-inclusives there, they can get fired if you don't like their service. They get paid the equivalent of $15 a night to serve you all night, you know, without complaint. Then they get taxed on that, and they have to find the transportation to get there. And this is the reason, part of the reasons why they're going to want to immigrate, you know, here. But I think those stories also need to be told, and I'm glad that somebody is telling them. Thank you.
I really appreciate that comment, and I'd like to just add to that. As you said, a lot of times people think, when you think Caribbean, you think sea, sun, and sand, right? And that is true. You know, it's a beautiful region of the world, but there are other stories there. It's not just your vacation destination, right? There are social issues there that are impacting people's lives. There are other issues that are impacting people's lives there. So I will honestly say that I got some backlash when this the first part of the series came out, from people who, a few people who felt as though I was, quote unquote, airing, you know, the dirty laundry of the Caribbean community, or, you know, this is, you know, dog whistle kind of things. But I have to just say, listen, I am not the first, nor will I be the last journalist to highlight this issue. This is an issue that has been prevalent in the Caribbean region for about 4 decades, if not more, probably more than that. But when it comes to research, we started seeing research about it 20 years ago. And Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, who you saw in that video, is the sociologist that coined that terminology, that started the research on this in Jamaica. And I made it my business to find her, to go to her as a main source, as a point where I knew that if I talked to Dr. Brown and I and I listened to her and got that knowledge from her that the credibility of these stories would be there, period. And Dr. Brown is the person that helped me to, once you have the trust of that person and that person knows you're coming to shed light on something in the right way, then I was able to get other people to talk to me. But at first I said, well, okay, Melissa, people really see it as one way, but that's why I felt it even more important to do this series, because these countries are not just your places that you go for vacation. They're complex, they have issues, there is diversity there is variation there, and these are ones of the stories, this is one of the stories that, you don't often hear too much about, but it is very real and it's happening to people every single day. I remember going into classrooms in Kingston, going into classrooms in Steertown, and Dr. Brown would say, well, how many people in this classroom know somebody whose parent has migrated? And there could be 20 students in a class, and almost every hand went up. It's a very, very real reality, not just in Jamaica, in the Caribbean region, period. Migration is one of those things that is going to continue to happen because of that economic necessity for people to move elsewhere and have better access to more money, more funds, to other opportunities. And while that's going to continue to be a reality, what I wanted to do with this story series, and I think we're getting there, especially with opportunities like this and others, is to show how can we mitigate some of those factors that lead to that breakdown in communication, breakdown in bond. How can we make sure that we keep families bonded? Because at the end of the day, that's very important. And then how, as you said, do we shine light on this situation of immigration that keeps families separated for such a long time? So that's why I felt it was so important to highlight it, regardless of, what some people felt as being, negative, because we have to confront some of these things. You can't just say, well, Caribbean is just music, fun, and sun. There's other things happening there that are very real and we should talk about, especially in the community. As a Caribbean American, we do not talk about mental health issues, period. It's see a counselor for what? It's unheard of. I've gotten laughed at. It's that kind of thing, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Do you think you could talk a little bit about what makes the situation in Jamaica unique compared to other Caribbean countries?
I would say, well, the reason why I chose Jamaica is because a lot of the research that came about over the last 20 years has been done there by a lot of Jamaican sociologists and psychologists. So they really had the background in this impact on their children. And then the migration rate from that country is so high, and you have so many households where you have parents abroad who have left children behind. I thought that it represented an example of a place that would give you a good idea of impact. Because it's not that this is not happening on other islands. It's just that because there was so much research done there already, and the fact that there's a high percentage of immigration and then people having to leave family members behind, I thought highlighting it from this country would make sense.
But why is it higher in Jamaica?
Why is it higher in Jamaica? So a lot of what I saw was when it came to population, that was one thing. And then when it came to the kinds of jobs that a lot of Jamaicans do. So for instance, you have a lot of nurses or a lot of people who work in agriculture, or you had people who worked in the kinds of jobs where they would get visas to come to the United States more often than not. So then you had a high migration rate of people leaving to do those exact jobs in the US, UK, or Canada. So that's what I found.
Childcare, nursing,
Education,
plumbing,
that kind of stuff.
type of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those were the kinds of jobs. And so when a lot of times, especially when it came to visa availability, when there was a call, not a call for visas, but when you had the availability of that for those kinds of professions, then you had people leaving in bigger ways in that regard. So that's where we saw some of that.
And Jamaica is a very educated, very skilled
Society.
society.
Mhm.
So folks are always drawing on them, from them
to fill workforce needs in other countries.
Thank you. This is a great, wow. This is a great talk. I'm Jack Hinman from the State Department. But I'm thinking that your work, I'd like to ask you, do you think your work could really be extended? I think it could be extended a lot farther than just what's going on with the Jamaicans. I think this is all over the place. My wife is actually from Romania, and they have one of the biggest diasporas in all of Europe. You know, that 2 million or more Romanians live in other countries. People are leaving their families for work all over the world. Philippines, and also the whole effect of separation. I'm thinking that these are overt examples. You know, like people actually physically separated. So there's an explanation for why relations break down or don't. My wife calls her mother every day. Every single day they talk for a long time. But it could shed light on problems that occur in relationships between parents and kids right here. You know, with people who are not separated physically. But I mean, there could be things coming out of this because it's so overt. And in a way, people can't talk about it, but actually they can because there's an actual explanation.
Right.
And I'm thinking that your work could have applications and extensions well beyond what you started with here in Jamaica and the Caribbean. I do want to. I meant that as a question, not a speech.
No, I really appreciate that. That's one of the things I'd like to do with this. So the series for NBC BLK was amazing, and it was my starting point. So I had my first story in Voices of New York in 2016. Then I was able to do this amazing series for NBCBLK.com. And now I really see this as something that I'd like to make ongoing because definitely the stories have not stopped. I hear from people weekly who are sharing stories with me. I want to know, how are you going to work on something else? I would like to turn this into a larger documentary project. That's one thing that I'm working on. I'm looking for funding right now. I'm hoping to partner with people to be able to get that done, get to other places. And then I think the other component that's really important and why I've been so excited to be working with Pulitzer in classrooms this week is to make sure that I'm spreading the word about this through education. Some of the greatest things that I've gotten have been from students, being able to share this and help them to understand this in the context of immigration, of how we look at things not only in this country, but around the world. So I do have plans to keep this going. This definitely did not stop once the series was published, but I'm just looking for ways to continue to do that. And I'm glad that I have this platform to share tonight, to work in the schools, but still definitely looking for other opportunities to do that. So now you have me thinking about it, okay, well, I need to get on this.
I hope so, because it's not going to stop. It's only going to grow. What's going on, not just Jamaica, but
all over.
It's only going to grow, and you're already on the wave. So you might as well
keep going. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bennett Hansen with Global Press. We are an international news agency. We have reporters in Haiti, so I'd like to ask, did you discover anything specific to Haiti? And did you discover migration to the Americas, to maybe Colombia, Mexico?
So to answer your first question about Haiti, I did, while I did not interview families directly that were impacted by the issues of migration from Haiti, I did interview social workers in New York City that counseled families who, by the time they got to them, were unfortunately in the foster care system at that point in time, because the breakdown in the bond and the breakdown in the communication had gotten so difficult at that point. And with some families who came from Haiti, that these children and their parents couldn't see eye to eye, couldn't get along. So by the time they actually got to these counselors, these children were either on borderline being put into foster care or were already there, and these counselors were actually brought in to do what they had hoped was done, 2-3 years ago, or maybe when the child first migrated to the United States, which was to be able to get them the kind of counseling they need to help reconnect them and to help them understand the issues that they had, the resentment, the anger, that kind of thing. So I didn't have direct interviews with those families, but I was able to speak to counselors who worked with families from Haiti. And so that's one of the things I would like to do as I expand this, is go to other Caribbean countries where this is very prevalent, and get those stories too. And not just the English-speaking Caribbean, French-speaking Caribbean, Dutch-speaking, Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and really get more of those stories. And the focus was just here because of, time and resources, and then just trying to actually start. So I didn't really have any look into anything as far as the Americas, but that is the next step for me. And that's something that I work on as I look to find more sources and continue working on this and make it a larger project, for sure.
I was wondering if you spoke to any government officials.
In Jamaica? Yeah, so I did make it a point to speak with government officials in Jamaica, so it would be the equivalent of child services in Jamaica, and I did get background information as to the situation and how they work with families. But I included that it informed my reporting, but I didn't use anything as far as direct quotes or direct things from government officials, but more so just for the background of how they have been working with families, different things like creating migration checklists for parents, so that you have to talk with the teachers, you sit down, you have a talk with the caregiver, you make sure that certain things are in place for your child, there's emergency numbers, like things to make sure that parents understand not only the gravity of the fact that they're going to be gone indefinitely, because most times people don't know exactly when they're going to be able to come back, and that there's some kind of routine in place. And then also the important part of having a conversation, letting your child know where you're going, why you're going, and that you're going to keep in contact with them, and that they know you're doing this for the good of the family. And one of the things that was so important for me too was to make sure that people knew that this was not in any way trying to paint these parents as bad parents, not at all. It was just showing that as they worked to do something that was good for their family, with the best interests of their children in mind and in their heart, these were some of the unintended consequences of that decision, definitely unintended. And we did our best to show that and to showcase that. And that's why it was so important for us to include the voices of people like Errol Ray Sr., like Claudette Higgins, and some other parents that we made sure to include in the second part of the series. We made sure to do that because this was in no way trying to say, hey, these are bad parents, but it's important to show the reality of how that decision to sacrifice for their children actually had some consequences that they didn't even intend or think would happen. I think there's a question right here.
So that's actually a really good segue into my question, which was, did any of your reporting kind of get into more of the the both emotional impact as well as financial impact of now being responsible for like remittances for not only your children, but a lot of times when you are the family member that was able to immigrate to the United States, now you're talking about potentially being a financial safety net for other family members as well. So did your reporting kind of get into that impact of the parents who have now immigrated to the United States or wherever, and kind of like the burdens that can come along with that?
So the second part of the series focused on a few things. It focused on, so what happens when these families reunite? What happens when somebody like Errol Ray Jr., finally comes to the United States and rejoins his father after 16 years? So it focused on, well, how do they reconnect? It focused on the legal process of reconnecting, like how difficult that is. That was a main component of it. Like, how legally difficult was it for them to actually reunite in person and live together again under one roof? So it mainly focused on the emotional, psychological, and legal parts of it. It didn't so much focus on, well, now these parents, the financial responsibilities that they may still have at home. It touched on it, but it was more so about those things that I just mentioned, because those were the two really heavy issues that I found within this story was before they reunite, and then after, how are they able to deal with that, not only emotionally but legally. What we did touch on when it came to finances was with the immigration aspect of it is, okay, a lot of questions I always got was, well, why are they separated for such a long time? Why is it that when the parent moves here, do they not just try to bring their child over? A lot of times it was money. So we did touch on that. It's by the time you pay the fees that you need to pay for yourself, for your applications, you pay your lawyer's fees, you're trying to pay for the apartment you have, you're taking care of your child who's back home, you're sending barrels. Where do you have money now left to actually get the applications needed for them, or the lawyer's fees to file for them? So that's what we touched on as far as finance, but we didn't go as deep into well, what are the responsibilities still left on the parent now that they have another mouth to feed in the house when the child rejoins them after a long time, and then still taking care of family back home. But that's something that I definitely want to expand upon as I look to do more on this topic in general.
I just wanted to add that a lot of times folks come over here for vacation and don't go back.
This is true.
And if you come here without papers, you can't go back home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a large part of the problem why folks don't see their parents for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm. And and in this series, I focused on people who came to work and had, either gotten a visa or were working toward that. I didn't focus on people who came and overstayed, but that is part of a problem. You may come on a tourist visa and then you overstay and you're here and you're trying to figure out how to stay here legally, but you're already here illegally. So then that presents those issues. And while you're trying to So that was something that not that I shied away from it, but there were so many layers to this story series that I thought adding another one of that nature would just make it very, very difficult. So I decided to focus on families where the parents came and migrated, they had gotten a visa or came under some kind of work program, and then were trying to bring their children over.
Thank you, Melissa, great presentation. In your talking with the students the last couple of days, tell what sort of surprised you? What were they surprised by in your reporting? What did they take away from what you were trying to share with them?
So I've had the great opportunity to speak with classrooms across DC and Maryland the last 2 days. And I've spoken with students from 5th grade through through high school students and the 12th grade. And I think what struck me the most is, especially with the 5th graders, they really stuck out to me. They're so empathetic, so curious, and they had so much to say. They really wanted to know, well, why would Mr. Ray have to leave his son behind? Why wouldn't he bring him with him? And so when I explained to them that, well, he can't bring him because of money issues and then because of how immigration works, they said to me, well, Miss Melissa, we have to fix this problem. And it's the kind of thing where it's yes, that makes sense. But to hear them be so, for them to be so engaged in the 5th and the 6th grade, and they really got into the issue is what really stuck out to me. I had a young boy in one of the classes this afternoon who says, well, my mom, that's my mom's story. She came here from Honduras and she came by herself. She left my older brother and sisters behind. She came here, she had me, but my big brother just joined me. And I said, well, how does it make you feel that you have your big brother now? He says, man, it's funny. It's so much fun. And I really have to thank my mom because she did so much for our family. I didn't know people talk about this kind of stuff. And he then like came to me after the class and whispered and said, well, how do you become a journalist? You know, how do you do this? He's like, come here. And I went by his desk and he said, well, how do you do this? And he said, what age do you have to be? Do I have to be 21 to become a journalist? And I said, well, no, you can be a student journalist. You can work on stuff right now. And then, you know, when you get to a certain age, you can do things professionally. And then we mentioned to him that you could start right now. You could really start right now. So those things really stuck out to me about the students. They were great.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, and to Melissa. We'll be around for a few minutes to keep the conversation going, so please continue to enjoy. And if you liked the story today, please follow us on social media. You can donate on our website. There's the donate button there that supports the education and journalism work. And come back to the next talk. And we have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate your time and for just, you know, being interested in this topic, because for a long time I would feel like, am I the only person that's interested in this or thinks that this should be told? So I really, really appreciate your time and for coming. It's been amazing. Thank you.